Hey everyone, Sean Deveney here from Heavy Sports, talking some NBA, specifically the Celtics here, late in the summer, what seems to be late in the summer, still only July 19th, and it's cooking out there. How are you, Steve?
Warm.
Yeah, this is Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider, who is just back from an excursion outside into the mid-90s. Here in the Boston area. The Boston area, we're going to talk Celtics here, Steve. I wanted to just kind of take a step back and look at what's happened going back in the last, say, 13 months since the big shakeup with the Celtics. Danny Ainge leaving, Brad Stevens taking over up at the top, and eventually Ime Udoka taking over as coach. Just after 13 months, when you talk to other executives and such, what do you think the perception of Brad Stevens as an executive is right now?
Well, a little easier to work with than Danny was. Although, it's funny. Everyone thinks that when the guy is the GM, he's the one that's on the front lines all the time. And the fact is, it's, with the Celtics, it was Mike Zarin and other people making calls, and, Ainge would get involved. Certainly. I think it's that way still. But I think there's a perception around. I know that there is the perception around the league that that trade negotiations are a little simpler now. Danny was a competitor. I mean, it's what the guy was a professional baseball player. The guy was a professional basketball player. The guy who's so good at golf you hate him. He's a competitor type, and I think he brought that into his trade stuff. The Celtics now, I think, are a little more, this is what we want. This is what we're willing to spend. If something falls in their range, they just do it. And they're willing to overspend in some cases if it's something they believe that they want/need.
And Danny had a reputation. I think this is what you're getting at of really wanting to win every trade.
Yeah.
Rather than, hey, look, some trades. Ideally, a trade is going to benefit you. It's going to benefit me. We're both gonna win to an extent. That is maybe a little more in line with where the Celtics are now. Obviously, you still want to win trades when you get into them, but there's more of an not understanding, but more of a willingness to accept the fact that you've got to give something to get something.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We talk a lot about the Derek White trade. A first-round pick and a pick swap, and Josh Richardson, who, you can argue the merits of Josh Richardson versus Derek White, particularly when it comes to Derek's contract. But the Celtics identified him as someone they wanted and the right fit for them. So they spent more than I think other teams would have. But if you get the guy you want and he fits your thing, and, we've talked about this 1,000 times. It's all about context. A guy playing for Team A can be a totally different player than he is playing for Team B.
Yeah, and certainly saw that with Al Horford last year, right? And when the Celtics give up a draft pick, I think at this point maybe we'll all wish Alperen Sengun luck and say it was worth it for the Celtics to do that. Blake Wesley is the guy that the Spurs wound up taking with the Celtics pick, so see how he does as well to see if it's worth it. But at some point, you're not going to get these guys unless you're willing to give up those picks, and that's where you are. You got to live with the fact that somebody might take somebody in your spot who winds up being successful.
And you don't know who the Celtics guy would have been this year. I do know last year would have been Sengun. He was the guy that they had targeted there. And then when the deal came up, they could get off of Kemba's salary and all that. That's when the wheels went in motion.
I want to switch gears a little bit, Steve, because one guy who I think is worth checking in on here at this point, midway through the summer, is Robert Williams. I spoke to somebody in his camp, and they basically said he's just not going to do it. He's going to shut it down basically for 6 weeks since the end of the finals. and then you go to Irvine, California. There's a facility there where he's going to work out and ramp up next month. How important is this offseason for Robert Williams just to sort of get himself reset and really make sure that that he's 100% when next year starts?
Well, he's hugely important to what the Celtics, what they do, what they need to do. And if you look at it, him building the foundation and to where he is now, the pieces should be in place. After this last year, he should understand, how important he is to the enterprise, what he can accomplish, and he can still be better. But he has to realize, hey, I'm a damn good player, and instead of sitting back and letting things come to him, he's good enough that he can make things happen, especially on the defensive end. So I think this is a huge offseason for him in terms of getting the rest, making sure the injuries are not something that's going to linger and become a chronic thing, and then building up to making sure he can go through a season. I'm certain that they'll be patient with him, try to pick their spots, as they will be with Al Horford as well. But everyone's going to look at the Celtics and think Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and all these things. But in terms of what this team needs to go, Rob Williams and Al Horford as well, but Rob Williams is a huge part about what can make them special.
Yeah, and I was actually looking at something today where he was listed as the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year next year. Take that with a grain of salt, of course, but you could certainly see it. And some of that, as you know, is narrative and momentum and things like that kind of decide where those awards go more so than necessarily who actually deserves it. But
more importantly, really, is how does Rob Williams fit in the Celtics defensive scheme? Is he a star in that scheme? And clearly last year, his ability, the switching ability to be able to get out on the perimeter, made them a really good defensive team. It was a big part of what made them a really good defensive team.
Yeah, but certainly, look, if you're going to win an award like that, or if you're going to be able to keep that continuity with the scheme going, games played is always, as they say, one of the more underrated stats, and he's got to be able to to be out there for 72 games. Obviously there may be some points at the season where they decide to give him some rest, but I think getting off that knee for 6 weeks is a good idea, and just like, because he was having fluid taken out, it was swelling up throughout the finals. That's something that they've got to make sure that is as healthy as can be to start the year.
Absolutely. And he has to break through the point too, where, he understands his body better. Here's a guy that's, young, still growing into things. He's got to know what each hurt signifies. You know what I mean? Like when he gets a sharp pain, is that something that, okay, I can work through that, or that I've got to get off the floor. And knowing the difference is huge for how a guy approaches the game mentally,
Right. If getting off the floor saves you from needing 2 weeks off, then you do that short-term thing and experience a long-term benefit. That's what you have to hope for, I think, with him. One other thing, Steve. We're looking around the Eastern Conference, and I'm seeing the Brooklyn Nets obviously in some a little bit of turmoil, let's say, and possibly some other teams looking to bring in whether it's Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Donovan Mitchell. I think from the perspective of the Celtics, or how would you see it from the perspective of the Celtics, is the status quo? Look, if Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving do have to go back to Brooklyn, there's no trade there. If Donovan Mitchell stays out of New York, that might be the best thing for the Celtics here.
I'd be more concerned about Donovan Mitchell winding up in Miami. But no matter, well, you can't say no matter what happens in the East, because there are certain moves that I'm sure could, alter things dramatically. But the Celtics are in a position where they're good enough that they need to worry about themselves. They don't have to be looking at, what's this team going to do? What's that team going to do? If they take care of their own stuff, they should be fine. They need to, integrate Brogdon and Gallinari and figure out a rotation that flows well, a substitute rotation, all those things. But if they take care of their own stuff, they're going to be fine. And, who's to say that what the Celtics are now will be the roster you see come post-trade deadline next February?
Yeah, and I think even the you mentioned Gallinari and Brogdon, even Derek White to an extent. Sure. Just trying to learn on the fly, and certainly when he first got to Boston, and even at times in the playoffs, didn't look 100% comfortable with what he was doing. So him going through the past couple of months to end last season and going through a training camp, that's going to be beneficial as well, I would think. Absolutely,
totally agree.
You mentioned Donovan Mitchell in Miami. That would scare you more than him landing. If from a Celtics perspective, I know you're not personally frightened of him either way. I would think.
I'll tell you a quick Donovan Mitchell story. Remember, if you heard about it, a few years ago, he just would show up at people's 4th of July parties and stuff.
I didn't know that.
Not a thing like say, hey, tell me where your 4th of July. He would just show up, and I said, "Did you really do that?" And he said, "Yeah." I go, "Damn!" He shook my head. I shook my head, and he goes, "Why?" I go, "Every time I do that, they call 911." It's he and I are different, I guess.
You did not show up at my 4th of July party this year. I don't know about yours.
No.
Well, thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Check out heavy.com sports for more on the Celtics and more on all of our NBA teams. Thank you.